Congruence, segment, angle and circles. Look at this paper. What is this shape called? Correct. This is a rectangle. Now join the opposite sides of this paper like this. They coincide with each other. Now, join these two sides. Even these two sides coincide with each other. From this, can you recall the property of a rectangle? Yes. The opposite sides of a rectangle are equal. Let us do one more activity.
Let's practice. Which of the following line segments are congruent? Length of segment AB is equal to 2.3 centimeters. Length of segment OP is equal to 3.2 centimeters. Length of segment RS is equal to 3.3 centimeters. And length of segment MN is equal to 2.3 centimeters. Among the four line segments given in the problem, length of segment AB is 2.3 centimeters. Length of segment MN is also equal to 2.3 centimeters. Line segment AB and MN have equal length. Therefore, segment AB is congruent with segment MN. Here is another activity. Look at the given figures. Are the two line segments XY and PQ? Line segments XY and PQ both measure 5 centimeters. Therefore, line segments XY and PQ are congruent.
We know that if the given segments are equal in lengths, then they are congruent. From this, we get some important properties of segments. Look at these two segments. Segment AB measures 5.2 centimeter. Segment CD also measures 5.2 centimeter. Hence, segment AB is congruent to segment CD. Or, segment CD is congruent to segment AB. If segment AB is congruent to segment CD, and segment CD is further congruent to segment EF, then segment AB is congruent to segment EF. Therefore, if the first segment is congruent to the second segment, and the second segment is congruent to the third one, then the first segment is congruent to the third segment. Let us do an activity. Look at this box. It is cuboidal in shape. It has 12 edges. Let us name them. Measure the lengths of the edges and note down your observations. From your observations, say which of them are congruent. LM is congruent to ON. LM is congruent to PS. PS is congruent to QR, and QR is congruent to ON. Hence, LM is congruent to ON, congruent to PS, congruent to QR. Similarly, LP is congruent to MS, MS is congruent to NR, NR is congruent to OQ, and OQ is congruent to LP. Hence, LP is congruent to MS, congruent to NR, congruent to OQ. Now have a look at these edges. LO is congruent to MN. MN is congruent to SR. SR is congruent to PQ. And PQ is congruent to LO. Hence, LO is congruent to MN, is congruent to SR, is congruent to PQ. What conclusion can be drawn from this? Correct. The opposite edges of a cuboid are congruent. In this activity, we have to observe the given shape and write the congruent pair of segments. Here, we are given two pairs of congruent segments and we have to write the remaining pairs of congruent segments. Segment EF is congruent to segment HG, is congruent to segment AD, is congruent to segment BC. Segment DF is congruent to segment CG, is congruent to segment BH, is congruent to segment AE. It is given segment AB is congruent to segment DC. Which other segments are congruent to these given segments? Segment EH and segment GF are congruent to segment AB and segment DC. Also, segment AE and segment BH are congruent, and segment CG and segment DF too.
Let's try an activity. Match the angles in column B with that of column A to form pairs of congruent angles. Angle P is congruent to angle D. Angle A is congruent to angle F. Angle B is congruent to angle O. Angle C is congruent to angle E. Here is another activity. Look at the given figures. Are angles ABC and POR congruent? Angle ABC is equal to 70 degrees. Angle POR is equal to 50 degrees. Therefore, angles ABC and POR are not congruent.
Look at this clock.
1. What time does this clock show?
It's 3 o'clock.
2. What is the measure of the angle between its two hands?
It is 90 degree.
3. At which other time is the angle between the hands congruent with this angle?
At 9 o'clock, the minute hand is at 12, while the hour hand is at 9, making a 90-degree angle. Therefore, the congruent angle formed by the clock is at 9 o'clock. Remember, two angles having equal measures are congruent. If angle ABC is congruent to angle PQR, then angle PQR is also congruent to angle ABC. If angle ABC is congruent to angle PQR, and angle PQR is congruent to angle LMN, then angle ABC is congruent to angle LMN. Therefore, if one angle is congruent to the second angle, and the second angle is congruent to the third one, then the first angle is congruent to the third angle.
Congruence of circles. Take a look at these circles. Let's check to see if they are congruent. Copy the circle with center O on a tracing paper. Now, place the traced circle over the circle with center P. We see that the circles fit each other. Congruence. It means that the radii of both the circles are equal. We can also measure the radii of each circle with the help of a divider. place one tip of the divider on point O and the other on the circle. Now, without changing the distance between the two tips, place one tip of the divider on point P. We see that the other tip falls on the circle. The radii of the two circles are equal. Therefore, we can conclude that circles with equal radii are congruent. Time for an activity. Which of these circles are congruent? The radius of the circle with center A is 2.5 centimeters. The radius of the circle with center B is 3 centimeters. The radius of the circle with center C is 2.5 centimeters. And the radius of the circle with center D is 5 centimeters. The circle with center A and the circle with center C have equal radius. Therefore, these circles are congruent.
Now let us do an interesting activity. Look at these bangles. They have the same thickness, but they are of different sizes. You have to find which of these bangles are congruent and form groups of congruent bangles. What will you do to find if the bangles are congruent? Correct. You will match them. We know they are congruent if they completely match with each other. Good. You have formed the groups. Now take two bangles from each group and draw its edge on a paper. Using a divider, measure its diameter. What do you find? The bangles which are congruent have equal diameters, which means they have equal radii. Find such examples in your surroundings. You will find many such things at your home.